The German philosopher Gottlob Frege has made an absolutely huge contribution to many areas of philosophy, but what would have to be his most significant contribution to the philosophy of language is his sense and reference distinction. The idea is that the meaning of words comes in two layers. First there is the layer of sense, and then there is the layer of reference. And to understand why he thinks meaning has this two-layer aspect to it, we need to see what motivated him to present it in the first place, because before he made this distinction, he thought that meaning just came in one layer. What I want to do in this video then is to talk about how Frege thought before he made this distinction, and what motivated him to present it. Only after that are we able to understand the consequences that Frege draws from this distinction. So let's go. In his early writings, Frege says that words have content, and the content of words is effectively what those words mean. Frege also thinks that sentences have content, and that the content of a sentence is composed of the content of the words in that sentence. So if we take a sentence like Frege is German, the content of that sentence is the content of the word Frege, and the content of the words is German. In this simple example, Frege thinks we have two different kinds of content. The content of the word Frege is a man, Frege himself, and Frege is a certain kind of object. Frege thinks that all proper names have objects as their content. So Frege, Seven, or the Pacific Ocean all have objects as their content. But Frege also thinks that definite descriptions have objects as their content. So phrases like the tallest building in the world, the US president, and my favorite t-shirt all have objects as their content too. The words is German in this sentence, however, have a concept as their content. In this case, the concept of being German. Frege thinks that anything that we can say about an object will be a concept. So the words is a horse, teaches philosophy, or lives in a shed all have concepts as their content. Frege further thinks that we can tell whether words have an object or a concept as their content based on whether those words are incomplete or complete. Words like is German, Frege thinks are incomplete, whereas words like Frege are complete. So if we have complete words, they must have an object as their content, whereas if we have incomplete words, they must have a concept as their content. Now let's look at the content of full sentences. We know that the sentence Frege is German has two bits of content in it. It has the object, Frege, and the concept of being German, and these two contents together make up the content of the sentence. Now what Frege thinks we do with the content of sentences is decide whether that content is true or false. And if we decided that the content of Frege is German was true, that means that we have decided that the object, Frege, falls under the concept of being German. Now this all might seem obvious and maybe even trivial, but from this observation there are problems. One of the central aims of Frege's philosophical work is to show that the truths of mathematical algebra can be derived from basic logical truths according to basic principles of logical reasoning. So Frege is particularly interested in the concept of two objects being the same. This concept is represented by the mathematical equals sign, and in the English language we express this by using the word is. Now of course there's nothing wrong with stating the obvious. It's perfectly fine to say that a spade is a spade or that 4 equals 4. But more often than not what we want to say is something not obvious. Perhaps we want to say that Elton John is Reginald Dwight, or that Joe Biden is the US president, or that 2 times 5 is 10. According to Frege's current theory, what we say when we make these statements is that two objects fall under the concept of being the same thing. But this immediately creates a problem. If I say that Joe Biden is the US president, I am saying that the content of Joe Biden and the content of the US president is one and the same object. But in that case, the content of the sentence Joe Biden is the US president must be the same as the content of the sentence Joe Biden is Joe Biden. But it doesn't seem as though these two sentences have the same meaning. And that's a problem. To his credit, Frege realised that this was a problem for his theory from the very beginning. But to start with, he tried to solve the problem by saying that the equal sign and is were somehow special words, and that the content of sentences in which they appeared was tied up together with the words we used to express that content. He soon found that this was not an acceptable solution, and by thinking about it more, he was led to his sense and reference distinction, which we can turn to now. In 1892, Frege published his landmark article on sense and reference. It's in this article that Frege explains his sense-reference distinction, the motivations for making it, and the consequences that can be drawn from it. He starts the article by talking about the problems of his old theory. In his old theory, the name that is used is part of the content of that name in certain circumstances. But Frege says that that can't be the case, because the name that we use to have an object as its content can be arbitrary. We can pick any word or any name to name that object, so it cannot be part of the content itself. With his old theory now ruled out, Frege goes about trying to come up with a new theory, and he does so by considering an example which has now become very famous. The definite description, the morning star, names the planet Venus, and the definite description, the evening star, also names the planet Venus. So Frege thinks about two sentences. One sentence is, the morning star is the morning star. The other sentence is, the morning star is the evening star. Now, according to the theory that just has content, the content of both of these sentences must be the same. But it's possible to know that the morning star is the morning star, and yet not to know that the morning star is the evening star. And since what is known is the content of sentences, Frege thinks that this is a contradiction. It can't be possible to both know that content and not know that content at the same time. Frege's new solution is to say that names have two layers to their meaning. One layer is the layer of reference. That is the object to which the name refers, just like it was in his theory of content. But now Frege says that names have another layer of meaning, which is their sense. The sense of a name is the way in which the object that it refers to is presented to us. Roughly, we could say that the sense of a name is the way in which we think about the object when we understand the name. So for example, take the name the morning star. The name the morning star refers to the planet Venus, but it does so by getting us to think about Venus as the bright star that we can see in the morning before the sun rises. Whereas the name the evening star, although it also refers to Venus, does so by getting us to think about Venus as the bright star we can see after the sun sets in the evening. So then, the morning star and the evening star both refer to the same object, the planet Venus, but they refer to it in different ways, so they have different senses. And Frege doesn't just think it's descriptive names like the morning star and the evening star that have senses. He also thinks that proper names like the name Venus has a sense as well. And that's just however we think about the planet when we hear that proper name. Now, although Frege doesn't say this in the article on sense and reference, he also thinks that concept words like is German also have two layers to their meaning. They both refer to a concept and refer to it via a sense, which is our way of thinking about that concept. Now that we have a bit of an idea about Frege's new theory, we can go back to our problem and see if it's going to be able to help us. If you remember, the problem was that the sentence the morning star is the morning star and the sentence the morning star is the evening star used to have the same content, which meant that they had the same meaning. But now meaning has been split into two. Because the sense of the evening star is different from the sense of the morning star, the sense of the whole sentence, which is comprised of those senses, is now going to be different. Frege calls the senses of sentences the thoughts that the sentences express. And when we know that a certain sentence is true, what we know is the thought that the sentence expresses. Okay, so we've now solved the problem as to how it can be that someone can know that the morning star is the morning star, but not know that the morning star is the evening star. The answer is because these sentences express different thoughts, and what we know is the thought that the sentence expresses. But what about the reference of sentences? To think about this, let's go back to our earlier example. the example of the sentence, Frege is German. Under his new theory, what used to be the content is now the referent of the words. So when we're wanting to know whether or not the thought expressed by Frege is German is true, we're deciding whether the object Frege refers to falls under the concept is German refers to. From this, Frege makes a certain observation. The thought that a sentence expresses, the sense of the sentence, is determined by the senses of the words that make it up. But what is it then about a sentence that is determined by the things that those words refer to? In Frege's theory, it's whether the sentence is true or false. Because of this, Frege says that what a sentence refers to must be its truth or its falsity, because it's the truth or the falsity of the thought that is determined at the level of reference. Frege makes another observation to help back up his point. He notes that if you take a sentence and you swap one name for another name that has the same referent, you can never go from a true sentence to a false sentence or vice versa. For example, let's take the sentence Joe Biden is old. If you then switch the name Joe Biden for another name with the same referent, like the US President, you end up with another sentence, the US President is old. And Frege says that if it's true that Joe Biden is old, it must also be true that the US President is old. Because those two sentences have the same reference, they must be true or false under the same circumstances, which once again demonstrates that the referent of a sentence must be whether it's true or false. So far, so good. This seems to make sense. The reference of our words has something to do with whether or not what we say is true or false, whereas the sense of our words has something to do with what it is we're expressing, what it is we're saying. Because of this, Frege says that the sense of the sentence, the thought, is the sentence's knowledge value, whereas the referent of the sentence is its truth value, the value the sentence has for us when we're trying to determine what is true. Now, from his new theory, Frege draws what seems like quite a radical consequence. If you remember in his old theory, you could know whether the content of a word was an object or a concept based on whether or not those words were complete or incomplete. When Frege looks at a sentence, he says it's clear that a sentence is complete, in which case a sentence must refer to an object. Now, in his new theory, a sentence refers to either its truth or its falsity, which means that truth and falsity must themselves be objects that sentences refer to. He calls these mysterious objects truth values. One of them is the true, the other is the false. Now, because the true and the false are objects of reference in this theory, Frege thinks they should be understood in the same way we understand any object of reference, whether Joe Biden, the Morning Star, or my favourite t-shirt. Because of this, when Frege announces the true and the false, he considers himself to be announcing a new discovery, in the same kind of way that a chemist might announce the discovery of a new chemical, or a mathematician might announce the discovery of a new number. So what do you guys think? Is Frege right when he says that our language has two layers in its meaning? Do we use words to both express thoughts as well as point to things outside of our mind, like objects in the world? Do you think the sense and reference distinction is another way of distinguishing what we think from what actually is? And what about truth? Is truth something outside of our mind that we can refer to as an object with our language, or is it something else? Tell us what you think in the comments, and if you want to see more videos and interesting topics like this, then please subscribe. Frege also has another argument for saying that the true and the false must be objects of reference, but it involves looking at how he understands fiction and fictional language. So if I've done the video, you can watch it now, it will be right here. Otherwise, have a wise day.